Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Corrigan, and I am the CEO and General Manager here at Des Moines Waterworks. Thank you for joining us today for our public information session on Central Iowa Waterworks for regional governance for drinking water production here in the Des Moines metro area. What I want to do today is walk you through, first of all, some of the history of regional water production here in the Des Moines metro area, kind of the road that brought us to this point where we're on the verge of creating Central Iowa Waterworks. I want to talk a little bit about what Central Iowa Waterworks is, what it is not. I want to talk about the benefits of regional governance from a regional perspective, but also why it's good for Des Moines Waterworks. And then I want to talk about next steps, after which we'll address your questions. Now, if you have questions during the presentation and you want to enter those in the chat, Michelle is going to be monitoring that. And if there's a question that she thinks would be beneficial for me to answer during the presentation, I'll go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll take a look at questions when we get to the end. So with that as our outline, let's start by talking a little bit about the history of regional water production here in the Des Moines metro area. Des Moines Waterworks has been a regional provider of drinking water for almost 90 years. Urbandale was our first wholesale customer in 1934. And then over the years, most of the other communities began to purchase all, or at least a portion of their water from Des Moines Waterworks, so that by the late 1980s, between 80 and 90% of the metro's population was receiving its drinking water from Des Moines Waterworks. In 1993, then there was a flood, and all of those folks were without water for a period of time. So after the flood, all the communities in the metro kind of got together and decided that it would be a good idea to build a more resilient, a more robust water supply system for the Des Moines metro area. And almost all of the communities in the metro contributed capital, somewhere between $70 and $80 million. At that time, what today would be hundreds of millions of dollars. And Des Moines Waterworks used that capital to construct a number of new facilities, 2 new water treatment plants, 3 deep storage wells, and a network of piping that connects all of that together, so that today we have a very robust, a very resilient system that serves the metro very effectively. All of the treatment plants and the storage wells are connected to that network of piping. All of our wholesale customers receive their water service from that same network. It's been a good system and it's served us well, but during the time it took to construct all of that, and in the time since most of it was constructed, the suburbs, and especially their water demand, have grown dramatically to the point where today the suburbs are using about 60% of the water that Des Moines Waterworks produces. And so, not surprisingly, given that they have contributed what in today's dollars would be hundreds of millions of dollars toward construction of the facilities, given that they're using more than 60% of the water produced by those facilities, there's been a growing interest in regional governance, being part of the planning, being part of the decision-making, frankly, having a seat at the table. And this actually, Central Iowa Waterworks is not the first attempt that we've made at establishing some sort of regional governance system for oversight of drinking water production here in the metro. But the historic efforts at regional governance always focused on what I would call the fair market value, or the purchase price of the entire water system as a starting point. So literally hundreds of millions of dollars, which resulted in required buy-ins for communities that wanted to become part of the ownership structure being very high, hundreds of millions of dollars. Finances were always a hurdle in those early efforts. And the conversation went something like this. We've already contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to build the existing facilities. We have to contribute hundreds of millions to buy in under this scenario. And then we have to pay again to build the capacity expansions that we need. We'll just go build our own facilities. It'll be cheaper, frankly. And That wouldn't be good for anyone, as we'll talk about a little bit later, if people started building their own independent facilities. So more recently, the interest never really faded, but more recently it was the board managed utilities here in the Des Moines metro area, the board managed water utilities, and that would be Des Moines Waterworks, West Des Moines Waterworks, and Urbandale Water Utility. Started the conversation anew, and this is several years ago, 2017 or so. Came to the table and said, look, there's got to be a way that we can come up with a workable regional governance system for drinking water. They hired a national consultant who specialized in that kind of regional initiative. There were more than a dozen open public meetings. Representatives from all the communities across the metro came and provided input, heard ideas. There were a lot of starts and stops and a couple of changes in direction through that process. Some big hurdles that we had to get over, not the least of which was the pandemic that just kind of shut everything down there for a period of time. But ultimately, again, it was the 3 board managed utilities that took all of that input in 2021, started meeting on about a weekly basis, and came up with a framework within which we believed a regional governance entity could be created for drinking water here in the Des Moines metro area. We published a document in November of 21, just about exactly 2 years ago, called the Outcomes Document. And over the last 2 years, based on the principles outlined in that outcome document, we have developed an agreement, a Central Iowa Waterworks agreement. There have been numerous versions. The various drafts have been sent out to all of the communities who are potential members. They've commented. There have been additional drafts. And today we have what we believe is a near final draft of that agreement that could effectively create Central Iowa Waterworks. Initially, there were 14 communities that were involved in the discussions. All of the current wholesale customers of Des Moines Waterworks, plus Grimes. Grimes has been a part of this planning process since the beginning back in 2016 or 17. And to date, there are still 12 of those communities who are at the table and interested in becoming founding members of Central Iowa Waterworks. So that's a little bit about the history, but just what is Central Iowa Waterworks, or what would it be if it were created? Central Iowa Waterworks would be an overarching cooperative governmental entity created under Chapter 28E of the Code of Iowa. Chapter 28E is a piece of the code that allows government entities to enter into cooperative agreements that benefit their constituents. There would be a representative board representing all the communities who are members, and there would be a very narrow scope of responsibility for this board. That scope of responsibility would include planning for and funding source, treatment, and transmission expansions, so new capacity in the system, managing contracts with the producers, Des Moines, West Des Moines, Grimes, Polk City. Central Iowa Waterworks would manage contracts with those water producers to produce the drinking water that Central Iowa Waterworks needed. And they would also be responsible for setting the wholesale rate that all of the communities who are customers of Des Moines or Central Iowa Waterworks would pay for their bulk water. Each founding agency would have a representative on the board. Communities over 100,000 population served would have 2 representatives on the board. And initially that would just be Des Moines Waterworks, but over time, as other communities reach that milestone of serving population of 100,000 or more, they would add an additional board member. And in normal day-to-day operations, it would be 1 member, 1 vote as they're making decisions on the board. But there are also provisions for weighted vote on certain questions within the agreement. And weighted votes would be based on each community's average annual water usage. And so in Des Moines Waterworks case, today we use about 40% of the water produced in the metro on average. And so in a weighted vote, Des Moines Waterworks weight would be 40%, and then each other community would have a proportionate share based on their average annual water use. Central Iowa Waterworks would own all of the water produced by all the water producers in the metro. So we would effectively be producing water for Central Iowa Waterworks. And that ownership is really what gives this entity standing. Member agencies would purchase their water exclusively from Central Iowa Waterworks. So you create this sort of one-to-one relationship. Central Iowa owns all the water that's produced, and the communities purchase their water directly from the entity that they represent. And then Central Iowa would charge a unified wholesale rate based on the operating and capital costs required to produce clean, safe drinking water here in the metro. Just as important as what is Central Iowa is what it is not. Central Iowa Waterworks would not replace any of the local water departments or water boards. Those local departments and boards would continue to operate and maintain the local water distribution systems. They would continue to provide direct customer service to their retail customers, the folks who live in their community, and they would continue to set the local retail water rates just like they do today. So if you are a resident of Des Moines and you receive a water bill from Des Moines Waterworks today, you would continue to receive your water bill from Des Moines Waterworks. You have a question or a concern, you would continue to call Des Moines Waterworks for customer service, and the Des Moines Waterworks board will continue to be responsible for setting retail water rates in the areas that Des Moines Waterworks serves. Now, the financial model is an important part of the Central Iowa Waterworks Agreement, and there are two specific aspects of the financial model that I would like to highlight for you here today. First is what we're calling the asset transfer true-up, and second will be the cost coverage and just exactly what is included in that unified wholesale rate that I mentioned. So, at inception of Central Iowa Waterworks, all source, treatment, and transmission assets in the region would be transferred to Central Iowa Waterworks, creating a joint ownership model where all of the members of Central Iowa owned those assets proportionately. But not every community comes to the regional table looking the same. So, we have communities in the metro who have production assets, like Des Moines Waterworks. We have communities in the metro that have invested in Des Moines Waterworks assets, like Clive and Ankeny and others. We have communities in the metro that own assets of their own and have invested. West Des Moines is an example. And then we also have communities that don't own assets and also have not invested. So we need to true that up to put all the members on a level playing field financially at the inception of Central Iowa Waterworks. So if you think of it this way, communities that come to the regional table with more in terms of assets or historic investment, more than they use, they're going to receive in that initial true up. And communities that come to the table with less in terms of asset capacity or investment than they need, they will have to pay. That true up will create a level playing field in terms of the historic financial investment that each community has made. And that level playing field is what will allow Central Iowa Waterworks to charge all communities the same unified wholesale rate going forward. Now, Des Moines Waterworks will come to the table with more in terms of assets than we use. We will have a small amount of reserve capacity that we will be compensated for, and currently it looks like we will receive approximately $70 million in that true up. The second important component of the financial model is cost recovery and what is included in the unified wholesale rate that I've mentioned a couple of times. Well, first of all, operational costs associated with production of drinking water will be included and will be the responsibility of Central Iowa Waterworks to pay. That includes things like water treatment chemicals, power, labor, purchased services, all of the direct costs and some allocated costs that are required to produce clean, safe drinking water. In addition to that, there'll be capital costs for repair, replacement, and upgrade of existing facilities that will be included in that unified wholesale rate. And that is things like, for example, replacing a pump that has stopped working. That's a capital expense, but it will be part of the unified rate, as would replacing a roof on one of the treatment buildings or something like that. So all of those costs will be included in the unified wholesale rate, in addition to a very thin layer of administrative costs for Central Iowa Waterworks. Now, the producers will be paid based on their actual cost. So rather than the producers selling water to Central Iowa Waterworks for a fixed amount per 1,000 gallons or dollars per gallon, their costs will be covered at the end of the year. And one other important component here is that the costs associated with expanding capacity as the region grows and communities grow and they need more water capacity, those costs will not be included in the unified wholesale rate. They will not be included in the costs that everyone pays. Those costs will be paid primarily by the communities that are growing, and those costs will be in addition to their cost of water. So that's a little bit about what Central Iowa Waterworks is. Let's talk about why we are doing this. What are the benefits of regional governance of drinking water supply here in the Des Moines metro area? There are a number of reasons, but first and foremost is best management of the available water resources. We are blessed here in the Des Moines metro area with two rivers that typically provide abundant water supply. But as the last 3 years have shown us, these resources are not infinite, and they need to be managed appropriately to ensure that everyone in the metro has the water that they need, and to ensure that if there is need for conservation or reduction in use, that we all do that fairly and equitably and evenly across the metro. So best management of those available water resources is one of the number one reasons to do this on a regional basis. Fair and equitable distribution of cost is another important reason. If some communities do decide to build their own treatment facilities, take advantage of the newest technologies, most cost-effective approaches to producing water, and then they capture all of that efficiency and cost savings for themselves, others in the community will lose out on that. And we know that the lowest total cost of water can be achieved by regional production. We just want to ensure that the cost savings and efficiencies and benefits are evenly distributed to all communities across the metro. System resilience is also incredibly important. I talked about the system we have today. It's pretty robust. We have 3 treatment plants. Again, if individual communities begin building their own independent facilities, that will not build on that resiliency that we have in the existing system. We want to make sure that all of the investments that are made in the regional system benefit everyone and contribute to the resiliency that we've built over the last 20 or so years. Representative governance, everyone has a seat at the table. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then region-wide cooperative planning for growth and economic development. Through regional cooperation, we can plan most effectively to meet the needs of all of the communities here in the Des Moines metro area and ensure that the region has the water resources it needs to fuel economic growth, development, prosperity for the entire metro area. Specifically related to Des Moines Waterworks, there are a couple of other benefits that I think are important to point out. First of all is return on historic investment. I mean, our customers have invested in this system over the years. And I talked about that asset transfer true-up. We have some additional capacity that we're bringing to the table that we're not currently using, and we're going to get a return on that investment in that asset transfer true-up. Financial stability and equity is another important thing for us. If other communities build their own water treatment plants, stop buying water from Des Moines Waterworks, that could threaten financial stability if there's enough of that happens. And if communities captures all of those cost-effective efficiencies that I described, it could create a financial equity issue where the growing communities, the newer communities are taking advantage of all of that, and the older communities are continue to use the older technology. Distribution of risk, I think, is an incredibly important point for Des Moines Waterworks to consider. Right now, basically, we serve as the owner. We carry the costs of ownership and the risks of ownership, and some of those are really obvious things like floods and pandemic response and those kind of things. Those risks fall to us, but there are other less obvious risks, like the risks associated with a wet year when no one is watering their grass. We budget to produce a certain amount of water every year, and we distribute our costs over that amount of water. And in a really wet year, when people aren't watering their grass, aren't using outdoor water to the extent they normally do, there aren't enough units of sale to cover our costs. In 2015, as an example, we had to pull millions of dollars out of reserve just to pay our staff because it was a very wet year and demand was very low. So through regional governance and regional cooperation, we can more fairly and equitably distribute that risk across the metro. And then long-term operating and maintenance agreements, that's another significant benefit for Des Moines Waterworks and for the region, really. It's going to provide stability as we make this change, to have the same agencies and entities that operate and maintain the treatment facilities today will continue to operate and maintain those facilities into the future. That provides stability for the region. It provides stability for our employees. And it will help ensure that the existing treatment facilities will be operated and maintained by knowledgeable, qualified staff for years into the future. I want to just touch on the public engagement process. We've tried to get the word out about Central Iowa Waterworks through our H2O line, newsletter, social media posts, bill inserts, articles, editorials, presentations. I have a presentation to a neighborhood association tomorrow, in fact. We've had a public comment period at each of our monthly board meetings since February of 2022. We had 3 public open houses. We're having this Zoom session. We'll have our board meeting on the 28th of this month, where there'll be opportunity for public comment. The board will approve the form of the agreement and establish a public hearing for the date of the December meeting, which is December 19th. And then at that board meeting, there will be a public hearing, and the board is scheduled to take action on the Central Iowa Waterworks agreement. So public education and input is ongoing. We're part of that right now today. We'll have a public hearing at the board meeting on December 19th. The 28E, 28F agreement is anticipated to be executed in the first quarter of 2024, and then it will likely be the beginning of 2025 before Central Iowa Waterworks actually starts operating as the entity it's intended to be. They'll have to seat a board, they'll hire an executive director, they'll enter into contracts with the producers and have to put into place a little bit of infrastructure that they will need for metering and billing and interacting with the customers. So that is what I have to share today. And so now, Michelle, I haven't been able to turn on my video, so there we go. There we go. Thank you. So now, if there are any questions, we'd be happy to try to address those. I do have some other folks here online with me today who can help with questions. They are specific to the financial model or to operational issues. Michelle, have you seen any questions in the chat or?
There is nothing in the chat.
Okay. Very good. Well, we'll give it a minute.
the question in the chat, Ted.
Okay, the first question. Oops. Why have Altoona and Bondurant opted out? Well, good question. I won't speculate, or I won't speak for them other than to say that I do believe that both Bondurant and Altoona they're going to do their own thing, produce their own drinking water, and I think that they believe that they can produce their own drinking water more cost effectively than they can join Central Iowa Waterworks. Beyond that, I don't really know. I don't have more detail than that. Thank you for the question. I guess if there are no other questions, I will thank you all for your time and attention, and remind you that we do have a couple of board meetings. Our November board meeting is the 28th, and our December board meeting is the 19th, if anybody does. I see another question. Foresee any hurdles? Well, I don't currently foresee hurdles. We need, many of the communities have already indicated that it is their plan to join. They've indicated they've passed resolutions indicating that they want to be part of the final analysis and the final draft of the agreement. I think that we have enough communities on board right now to make this work, but there are a couple of communities that haven't decided yet. We're really hopeful that they will decide to become members, because I think we are better off with the more communities we can have at the table, the better off we are. So the only hurdle I see at this point is if we have other communities that don't join. But right now it appears to be leaning in a positive direction, and so I'm hopeful. See a thumbs up. Okay, well, again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate. Remind you about the board meetings. I look forward to moving the process forward, getting the resolution or the agreement finalized and passed, and kicking off Central Iowa Waterworks in the new year. So thank you for your time and attention, and we'll see you soon.